Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste everyone. Welcome to the last class of Kathopanishad. Some of you have written to me also, and actually I would like to finish with this session today, the Kathopanishad, and after some time we can take up some other scripture, not immediately but after some time. But I would like to end this today because there's only one part left, and we should be able to finish in the next 1 hour. So there are no questions, so we can continue. And it's a very interesting portion with very many important ideas. So we'll just go through it completely. Urdhva Mulo, that's the canto we are taking up. Please go to that in your book. It's part 2, canto 3. Urdhva Mulo Avakshakha Esho Ashwatha Sanatanaha Tadeva Shukram Tad Brahma Tadevamritam Muchyate Tasmin Loka Shrita Sarve Tadunateti Kaschana Etadvaitat. This is the beginningless people tree that has its roots above and branches down. That is pure, that is Brahman, and that is called immortal. On that are fixed all the worlds. None transcends that. This verily is that. So this characteristic example of a people tree, you will find it even in the Bhagavad Gita. So why are they giving us this illustration? It's a very figurative expression you find in various scriptures. Urdhva Mulo Avakshakha Esho Ashwatha Sanatanaha. They are talking of a inverted Ashwatha, that is people tree. So why is it inverted? What do they mean to say by this? They say that the roots are in Brahman, and the entire tree hangs downwards. And the tree is nothing but this world of manifestation, all the different realms of existence, and then this particular earth where we perform and then all our actions, all this constitutes the tree. But where is it rooted? It's rooted in the heavens, as it were. It is rooted in Brahman. The world of manifestation is rooted in the Supreme. This is what they mean to say. And why is it inverted? Because the roots are in Brahman, but everything else, the branches, the trunk, the leaves, everything as it were hangs upside down. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is stable and straight. You know, the very word Ashwatha is very interesting in Sanskrit. Ashwaha asti iti. Actually, Ashwaha sthataha, which means there is no tomorrow to it. Shwaha is tomorrow. It is so impermanent. It is so changing in nature. That's why the Ashwatha tree is taken as example. Everything about the manifested world is impermanent, transitory, ephemeral, constantly changing, but we cling to it as if it is the permanent thing. But the verse tells us, no, the only permanent thing are the roots which are in Brahman. So if you know the supreme reality of this existence, you know, as it were, the essence of this manifested world. Otherwise, it's all just topsy-turvy and utter confusion. That's all. Nothing permanent about it. So it's a figurative way of telling us that the essence of life is God. The essence of life is Brahman. Strive to attain to that. Everything else is simply changing and has no meaning. Tasmin loka shrita sarve tadunateti kashana. All of these worlds which you see, these different realms of existence, they are actually established in Brahman. That is the sole reality. And everything else here will keep on changing, whether we like it or not. That is the way of life in the manifested world. So again and again, the same idea is coming in different ways. This verily is that the ultimate reality of Brahman is where the manifested world has its roots. This is that Om. Search out this reality. This is what they are telling us. So let's go to the next verse, all connected ideas. Yaridam kimcha jagat sarvam prana ejati nisritam mahadbhayam vajramudyatam ya etad vidur amritaste bhavanti. All this universe that there is emerges and moves because there is the supreme Brahman, which is a great terror like an uplifted thunderbolt. Those who know this become immortal. So you see, all of this manifestation, it has its roots in Brahman, it emerges from Brahman, and it dissolves into Brahman. And Brahman, as it were, is a, why do they call him a great terror? How can consciousness be a terror? What they mean to say is it overwhelms and overpowers the manifested world. That's the meaning. See, the reality of consciousness actually supersedes everything. But in our experience, we have turned it around, you know. In our experience, what impinges on our senses seems to supersede everything because it directs our thought process. But for those who dive into the knowledge of the Supreme, it is consciousness alone that is the supreme principle of this universe. And everything is subservient to it. That is why it is the Mahadbhayam, the great terror, the overwhelming reality of life. This is what they mean to say. You see, even the next verse is telling us the same thing. It's a connected idea. Bhayad asyagnis tapati, bhayad tapati suryaha, bhayad indrascha vayuscha, mrityur dhavati panchamaha. From fear of him, fire burns. From fear shines the sun. From fear run Indra and air and death the fifth. So all these deities and the sun, everything, the gods, all of them lived in fear of Brahman, as it were. So, what they mean to tell us is Brahman is the supreme reality of the universe. Everything else is an expression of Brahman and subservient to the power of Brahman. God is the supreme reality of life. Sri Ramakrishna used to give his very homely example that you see, zeros have no value in themselves. You add a whole lot of zeros, it means nothing. But you place a 1 behind the 0, at once it gets value. Consciousness is like that. Think and see. It makes a lot of sense. Without pure consciousness, nothing has reality. Everything acquires reality in awareness. Everything becomes perceptible in awareness. So that is why this is the supreme reality of life, of whatever we see in the manifested world, Brahman, and it lords over everything, as it were. That is why all the deities, all the gods, the sun, all of them function through fear of Brahman. It's an expression. It's a figurative way of saying that consciousness is the supreme reality of life, nothing else. Then we have the fourth mantra. Iha cheda dashakat bodhum praksharirasya visrasaha tata sargeshu lokeshu shariratwaya kalpate. If one succeeds in realizing here before the falling of the body, one becomes freed. Else, because of that failure, one becomes fit for embodiment in the world of creatures. You see, very interesting verse, because people are so interested in where they are going to go, in knowing that, you know, where we dwell right now, that's where we are going to go. It's that simple. Where our mind dwells right now, just here, that's where we'll be going. So if the mind dwells in the sense world, well, we will enter the the realm of creatures who are given just to sense enjoyment, sense pleasure. If our mind dwells on intellectual things, yes, we will enter that kind of a realm. And if our mind is established in awareness, of course, we are going to touch this state which they are speaking of. So, if one succeeds in realizing Brahman here, one verily will go into that realm, the realm of the Supreme. It is, you call it Nirgun Brahman, Hiranyagarbha, whatever. And otherwise, failure to attain to that results in being born in a womb in the world of creatures. So everything is determined by the level of knowledge or awakening we get in this life. And that again depends a lot on our karma, right? So all these are connected. Good karma ensures clarity in the mind. So through clarity, one attains the state of higher awareness. And through that, one goes into higher realms. Otherwise, one is back again. Actually, if I go deeply into this verse, this one verse alone has a lot of explanation behind it, because the different realms which are described, they are relatively the same, in every religion. That you do good and you have a sure place in heaven. You do something bad, you have a sure place in hell. And you do something a little good, a little bad, then you have the Pitralok, the world of mains. And you do something supremely good, uh, something really elevating, and you lift the minds of people, then you have higher realms. They are called Satyalok, Tapalok, all this. Realms where sadhana is possible. And if you really attain to some level of realization, then you go straight to the realm of God. We call it whatever, Vaikuntha, Hiranyagarbha, Kailash, the kingdom of heaven. You can say they are all extensions in the realm of Sagun Brahman. And if you attain complete illumination, Brahma Jnana, you go to the realm of Nirgun Brahman. But don't imagine this is a going in space and time. How can it be? You see, the realization takes place in us, isn't it? In our system. So it is all these heavens and hells are extreme poles of your own consciousness, actually speaking. The more you perform sadhana, the clearer this becomes. There's no going anywhere. Right here, right where you are, you can experience heaven and hell, depending on the density of our minds, You can experience both the realms. So, what it means to say is you enter the realm which you have trained your mind into, or you have got used to. You enter that particular realm, you stay in that actually. And as the saying goes, you can very well create a heaven out of hell and a hell out of heaven wherever you are. So, it's all to do with the mind ultimately. Then यथा दर्शे तथात्मनि यथा स्वप्ने तथा पितृलोके यथा सुपरिव ददृशे तथा गंधर्वलोके छाया तपयोरिव ब्रह्मलोके. As one sees in a mirror, so in one's intellect. As in a dream, so in the world of the mains. As it is seen in water, so in the world of the Gandharvas. As it is in the case of shade and light, so in the world of Brahma. What they mean to say by this verse is, when the intellect becomes spotless like a mirror, you can perceive reality as it is. You can know the self if you clear the intellect completely, purify the mind, and not by going to any realm. Whatever you have to do it right here. That's what they are trying to tell us. Because you see, the next thing that they say is, in a dream as in the world of mains. So in the Pitralok, how will you be perceiving reality as you perceive in a dream? In the world of Gandharvas, they are supposed to be the celestial musicians. So there, as you will see something in water, it will appear like that reality. and it will appear like shade and light in the word of Brahma. What they mean to say is everywhere it will be hazy unless you have cleared your mind here. This is the place where you have to aim and attain self realization, self knowledge, and not in some other realm somewhere. That is why this is called the Karma Bhumi, where we manufacture our karma, and it is the place where you do your sadhana and get out of the cycle of birth and death. So let's not expect to sit here and plan our journey further on, it won't happen that way. What we do here, exactly that state, I'm telling you, it's a transformation of your consciousness finally, which brings you into these realms or whatever you call it. It's your own mind. It's in your own, everything is in the mind ultimately. All experience is in the mind. And you are the seat of experience. So there's actually no going anywhere. And if we don't attain it here, that's when, we get worried about where we'll be going. So the whole point is somehow, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, get the knowledge of the Supreme right where you are through sadhana. And don't imagine going here and there. This is what they are trying to tell us. So now verses 6, 7, and 8, I'm going to skip because we have already studied these ideas and they have been repeated actually. So we go straight to 9. How can there then be any possibility of the vision of the incomprehensible? So you see from here, the verses are very good, like almost the rishis realizing something and then transmitting it, giving it to us. They are very powerful mantras. Na sandrishe tishtati rupamasya, na chakshusha pashyati kaschanainam, rida manisha manasa viklupto, ya etad vidur amritaste bhavanti. His form does not exist within the range of vision. Nobody sees him with the eye. When this self is revealed through deliberation, it is realized by the intellect, the ruler of the mind that resides in the heart. Those who know this become immortal. See what a powerful mantra this is. You obviously can't see Brahman through your vision, isn't it? Through the eye. Can we see him with the eye? Of course not. Why? He is that which, it is that which allows the eye to function, due to which the eye is functioning. How can you see it with the eye? You see, the presence of consciousness makes the mind conscious. The hardware of the mind, the template of the mind, physical template of the mind is the brain. So then your visual cortex gets lit up, as it were. And thus you are able to perceive. So at the heart of the whole thing is consciousness. Now, how can you see consciousness with the eye? You can never do it. The eyes are seeing due to consciousness, but you cannot see consciousness with the eye. The ears are functioning due to consciousness, but you cannot hear consciousness through the ear. So, what is the way to shut the senses and turn the mind inward? If you want to detect the self, pure consciousness, otherwise, just acknowledge its presence in every activity of your senses, of your mind. Just recognize it. That is also a way. That's the way of Vedant. Just recognize the presence of self. Because you are aware, everything else follows. Perception, sensation, understanding, mentation, everything. So the way of Vedanta is just recognize the fact of your awareness. And the way of yoga is shut the senses, shut the mind, and you will be introduced to the self by yourself. So all these powerful systems, this is what they are telling us, that you must recognize the seat of your perception. Don't get carried away merely by your perceptions, your thought process. Recognize what is making it happen. And how do you recognize it? How do you realize it? It is realized by the intellect, the ruler of the mind that resides in the heart. See, this is the very essence of Vedant, what they are telling us here. How do you know the self? Through the higher intellect, which is called the Dhi in the Vedas, which you also use in the Gayatri. And this intellect is the ruler of the mind. The nature of this intelligence is not the nature of the cogitating mind. It is far superior to that. And it resides in the heart. This intellect is located in the heart center, not in the somewhere in the brain. So you go to Google, all the images of intelligence will be in the brain. That's just an assumption, you know. Intelligence at this level resides in your heart. What it means to say is there is something glorious in the human being, which is at the center of your personality, which is called the heart. And this is your higher intelligence, which reflects the light of the self perfectly. So if you want to find the self, you will have to find it through this Dhi in the heart. You are the self. The whole problem is we think we are the body, and so there's a heart somewhere in the middle, and in that heart of the size of the thumb is the self. All this is pure imagination. You are never the body. That's the first fundamental fact about you. You wear a body. You're donning a body, but you are not the body. In fact, you are more mind than body. Think and see. You identify with your thoughts more than with the body. So, but actually speaking, if you reflect on this further, you are more aware than identified. So then you are the awareness in which there's a thought process through which you identify with the body. This is no theory. This is the fact about the human experience. So because this is the fact about our experience, awareness is fundamental to our being. Thought is still a stranger to that awareness, alienated, as it is. It's not part of my being. It's external to my being. And through that thought, I'm identifying with the body and the world of objects. So they are further estranged. And how on earth I go and identify with them and sort of imagine I am that is the great Maya of this universe. In our own experience, the opposite is true. But in our thinking, this perversion has happened, this Maya has come in. Maya actually attacks your buddhi, your intelligence. It corrupts your intelligence. So the intelligence turns outward and starts thinking, I am this, I am that, I am that, I am the body. So the way to proceed is, first of all, analyze the situation, what is happening. And if you analyze it in a very clear state of mind, you come to the fact of your awareness. Nothing more is required. So it is for this that all spiritual practice is there, all the different techniques of meditation. Ultimately, they are helping us understand our true nature. So this is how one goes to the heart, and knowing him, one becomes immortal. So you see, everything that a man does actually in life, you think and see, this is really very interesting. He does it to become immortal. Even the search for name and fame and whatever, career and profession, everything is that my name lasts long enough. So you're doing everything to become immortal, but there is only one thing that ensures immortality. That is knowing our true nature. And all of this, the rest is an assumption of the mind again. So this has to be understood by oneself, because everything that a human being does, it is to become immortal. Even making a family, raising kids, all of this is only so that I in some form remain over. But check and see how long things will remain. And what I mean by I, what will remain? What of me will remain? So that is why the search for this knowledge. I, in my true nature, as awareness, am perfect, am immortal, I'm eternal. In fact, time is part of mind, not part of me. I'm far beyond time. So, touching this in first person experience, this is the essential thing. See, that is why I always insist meditation, more important than study. Study belongs to the realm of mind. Meditation goes beyond mind. The touch of consciousness comes in first person experience, meditation. Then you can study. After that, you can keep studying to keep your mind on it, whatever. But this meditation is so very important for this knowledge. So let's go to verse number 10. Yada panchavatishtante jnanani manasa saha buddhischa na vicheshtate tamahu paramam gatim. When the five senses of knowledge come to rest together with the mind and the intellect too does not function, that state they call the highest. See, even the upai, the means, has been beautifully expressed. All of this has to come to rest. The five senses of knowledge, what are called jnanendriyas, the senses of perception, the senses which bring us knowledge, all of them have to be put to rest together with the mind and the intellect. Arresting the activity of the mind, arresting the activity of the intellect, there's a purpose to it. You're not doing it just like that. Why on earth, after you see, after we have developed the brain to this extent, why should you rest it? Why should you put it down? Just so that you arrest the activity, so that you awaken into higher awareness. If that is not happening, please don't arrest the activity, because then we'll just go into tamas. If that is not happening, please continue with good thinking, good work. Definitely. But the state of yoga, if it can be captured in first person, and this is a perfect possibility, it happens in the very ripe mind, ripe life, that you arrest the thought process, you will awaken into higher awareness. It requires a huge sanskar and karma backup to be able to achieve this. If that is there, you just awaken into pure awareness and you understand the place of the mind. Such people hold the dead mind as something very important. But just now, if we try to kill the thought process or the mind activity, we'll go nowhere. Because a certain, as I'm telling you, a certain level of life and awakening is required for this to happen. And the sanskars of that kind are required, the impressions of that type. So then one naturally awakens into that. So that is why that process is being mentioned here, that when they do not function, all of these, then you can know you can reach the highest. This is actually yoga. You know, the very first mantra of yoga in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, it says, Yogastu, it's the second mantra actually. First is Ata Yoganushasanam. Second is Yogastu Chitta Vritti Nirodh. Stopping the modifications of the mind. Why should you stop it? So that you awaken into awareness. See, I'll tell you the great secret of spiritual life. To become intensely conscious from within. by whatever means is very important. If you have become intensely conscious from within, you can dispense with the thought process. To become intensely conscious from within, which means to become vitally alive, it will directly lead to intense mental awareness. When you are vitally alive within yourself, which means intensely conscious, mentally you become highly aware, full of awareness. Then you will easily dispense with the thought process. Thought is only an obstruction then. Thought is not required because you have become so intensely awake within. This state will lead to pure awareness. But if that has not happened and you remove the thought process, you will go into sleep. Raman Maharshi says this at one place. If you carefully read his talks, you will find this. When the heart center is open, if you arrest the thought process, you go into the state of realization. If the heart center is closed and you stop the thought process, you will go into sleep, he says. So there's a way to do it. That's why I'm saying intensely conscious by yourself from within. This is what the state of yoga ushers you into. You're vitally alive to the depths of your being. Then you can remove the thought process. You become even more alive. To be vitally alive means to be mentally aware. But this you must catch it in your own system. Don't even believe me or the Upanishad. Please catch it in your own system. See, this entire process is like this. I must feel the truth of this. Then you corroborate the truth with the scripture. So that is why they are telling us the 5 senses of knowledge together with the mind and intellect have to be brought to rest. As long as they are functioning, your tendency will be to be carried away by their function, to get identified with whatever you're thinking, whatever your intellect is doing. So that's why stop it. See, the technique has to be mastered to perfection. Then only the realization comes. Please know this. You can't assume realization is already there because the self is always there. Although that is the ultimate truth, that the self is always there, for it to come into full fruition in my being, I must master the technique. So that is why it is most of the Upanishad you will see, it is technique, prakriya based. They are highlighting the techniques for us. See, the next verse also is telling us the same thing in a deeper way. Tam yogamiti manyante sthiramindriya dharanam apramattastada bhavati yogo hi prabhavapyayo. They consider that keeping of the senses steady as yoga. One becomes vigilant at that time, for yoga is subject to growth and decay. See, the word yoga is coming in the Upanishad. Both Kathopanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, all so, and there's a whole class of Upanishads called Yoga Upanishads. They all speak of yoga as the means to Vedantic knowledge. The technique and the result cannot be separated. So, what are they telling us here? This keeping the senses inward turned and steady is what is called yoga. What happens as a result? One becomes very vigilant at that time. See, this is what we have been discussing. But then they are warning us yoga is subject to growth and decay. So be careful. You can lose the state. So take care. See, Vedant does not belong to the realm of the mind. Please understand this. The experience of consciousness is far beyond any mental function. So all study and scripture, everything falls very short of the reality. You cannot use it as a means. That's why. Even vrittis, any subtle vritti cannot be used as a means to the knowledge of Brahman. When they use the term Brahmakara vritti, please know it is something else. It can't be compared to a vritti. Raman Maharshi used to say it is for the lack of a better word that they are using vritti. It is just awakened consciousness, awareness, pure awareness. No vritti is required to understand it, to go into it. You will plunge into it if you are well prepared. That's all you can say about it. Because it is being and becoming. It is not thinking, however subtle. Vritti is to do with mind, with thinking, thought. Modification of mind is called vritti. It has nothing to do with that. In fact, your vritti becomes knowledge because of the light of consciousness falling on it. So how can vritti reveal consciousness? So that is why tham yogam iti manyante, attain the state of yoga to enter this knowledge, they are telling us. Where the senses become very steady and inward turned, the mind becomes very steady and inward bent, and the intellect turns all inward and stops its normal functioning. That state of extreme steadiness, which you will find again and again described in the Bhagavad Gita also, that state of extreme equanimity, balance, that is called yoga. And it leads to this knowledge. Then only we understand the sheer perversity of our senses and mind, you know. When you enter this knowledge, you understand how stupid we were and what we invested our life and energies into. The state of yoga is the sanest state of existence. When you touch it, you know it. The rest is all sort of balancing at different ends to get a little pleasure, a little joy. We have managed to fool ourselves thoroughly, in a sense. So it is only the state of yoga. See, knowledge is comparative. When you know something very steady, then you understand the perversity of unsteadiness. So that is why the state of yoga is required to help you discriminate and enter the state of pure being. Then we have, you see, this is also a very, very beautiful mantra. Naiva vacha na manasa praptum shakyo na chakshusha astiti bruvatonyatra katham tadupalabhyate. It cannot be attained through speech, nor through mind, nor through eye. How can it be known to anyone apart from him who speaks of it as existing? Pretty obvious, isn't it? How can you attain it through speech or mind or eye? You can't attain it through any of these. But it can only be known as pure existence. It is existence appearing as this world of manifestation. See, we in Vedant, we always say, it is not that the whatever the object, this book, is existing here. Existence is appearing with this name and form at present to my equipment. If you actually check and see the truth of this statement and feel the truth of this statement, it will strike you like anything. Nothing exists in itself. It is impinging on your equipment as that thing. Because perceive anything only depending upon your instrumentation, what you are enabled to perceive. Only that much of reality you will perceive, isn't it? Even physics gives us this idea very clearly. I can only perceive that range, electromagnetic radiation, only within the visible light range, because I have eyes which can only track that much. so also everything that I perceive is within the epistemic limits of time, space, and causation, within the limits of my senses, of my mind. And so I only perceive one bit of reality. Like there's a huge jigsaw puzzle with, say, 100 pieces, and I just discovered 4 pieces which, well, you can fix them together. And I said, I discovered the whole of reality. This is what we are doing. So understanding the limitations of the senses and the mind is primary to attaining knowledge of Brahman. Understanding that this equipment is not going to take me there. That's why I stop looking outward, because I'm not going to get it that way. I learn to turn it inward. That is why it is to be understood, it is to be known as existing, as existence itself, not as this thing and that thing. See, this point has really to be grasped to understand the beauty of the Upanishad. Anything, any object is Brahman alone appearing in one particular name and form. The rest of the identity that you give to that object is the creation of your mind. Does this make sense, what I'm saying? Or it's too abstruse? If it doesn't make sense, just drop it. But if it makes sense, please try to grasp it, because this is such an important point. Nothing exists as that thing in itself. To your equipment, it appears as that. And actually, it is Brahman appearing in a particular name and form. The book is existing is a wrong statement. Existence is appearing as the book right now. To this equipment is the right statement about this book. Just like how the table upon which this laptop is sitting, this table is more wood than table, it's wood in a particular name and form. But it's got fixed in my mind that this is called a table. And I just dispense or put aside the concept of wood. But in reality, it is a better description of the table would be wood in a particular name and form. So also everything about manifestation is Brahman in a particular name and form. It is pure existence appearing in a particular name and form, to which we have given absolute identity. That's the whole problem. So that is why he is telling us here that Brahman becomes known to him who knows it as pure existence. And thus, everything existing is verily that. See, the 13th verse also tells us the same thing. Asti tyevopalabdhavya tatvabhavena chobhayoho asti tyevopalabdhasya tatvabhava prasidati. The self is first to be realized as existing, and then as it really is. Of these two aspects, the real nature of the self that has been known as merely existing becomes favorably disposed for self-revelation. First, you know Brahman as existence itself. Then you know him as consciousness. Existence, the fundamental nature of anything is existence. Not that now there's a lamp here. This lamp is existing. Brahman is appearing as this lamp at present to my equipment. Existence itself is Brahman. So you can't say Brahman is existing. Existence itself is Brahman. And beyond this, you understand consciousness is Brahman. The nature of pure existence is consciousness. Everything else functions on borrowed consciousness. Only pure existence is pure consciousness. It is existing in itself. So nothing else is required to validate its existence. The nature of consciousness is like that. But everything else, you validate it only in your awareness. So it doesn't have absolute existence. It doesn't have independent existence apart from your awareness. So this is a hard point to digest, but if you manage to digest it, you get a grasp over fundamental ideas in Vedanta. The nature of existence and consciousness, and the fact of uh, the there is no independent reality called matter. So this is a moot point in philosophy, over which philosophers have been debating over centuries. The independent existence of matter, is it real or is it not? So Vedanta will tell you there is nothing independent except consciousness. There is nothing real, that is why, except consciousness. So you may believe as much as you want to or as much as you can at present, but if you reflect on this again and again, the truth will simply strike you. See, the nature of Vedanta is once it strikes you, you are permanently a Vedantin. You cannot go back because you realize that to be the truth. The nature of reality is like that. Once you intuit it, you become one with it. So that's why the insistence on realizing the self first in order to know the nature of this world of manifestation. So this is what the 13th verse says. And then we come to the 14th. Yada sarve pramuchante kama yesya ridhi shritaha atha martyo amrito bhavati atra brahma samashnute. When all desires clinging to one's heart fall off, then a mortal becomes immortal and he attains Brahman here. So why should desires fall off to attain this knowledge? Because as long as the mind is teeming with desires, you are going to follow those desires and the mind will remain outward turned. And you will only be identifying with whatever happens in your mind. That's the nature of desire. It identifies you with the object of desire. So it will keep you busy. The nature of desire and Maya is it will keep you busy with the external. Busy and happy and unhappy and engaged, like that. So that is why the heart should be emptied of desires. Holy Mother Shri Sharda Devi would say that is the state to be aimed at, desirelessness. If you wish to pray to God, pray for this, she would say, desirelessness. So the beauty of this state is you immediately will know the truth about anything. So the desireless mind is the mind full of awareness, without a conditioned thought process, without a compulsive, impulsive tendency. So this pure mind, you see, they are giving us the complete picture of how to attain self-knowledge. The pure mind, desireless mind is required. Then the 15th was also connected verse. Yada sarve prabhidyante hridayasyeha granthayah atha martyo amrito bhavati etavadyanuशासनम. When all the knots of the heart are destroyed, even while a man is alive, then a mortal becomes immortal. This much alone is the instruction of all the Upanishads. So the knots of the heart, you can call them the complexes of our mind, the conditioning, the compulsiveness, the terrible negativities, all these are all the knots of the heart. So they are destroyed. They can be destroyed even when a man is alive, which means to say there's no post-mortem liberation. Right through sadhana, attain it. Then a mortal becomes immortal. Here only, the person is able to overcome this.